Money FM 89.3. Best of breakfast. Morning Shot.
Welcome to Morning Shot. I'm Audrey Seek. Now, layoffs are never easy. For employees, it's a moment filled with uncertainty, and for companies, it's a test of how fairly and responsibly they can handle a difficult process. The recent retrenchments at Agoda have raised fresh questions about what companies can and cannot ask of employees, and have stirred debate not just about the human impact, but also about where the legal boundaries really lie in Singapore. So today we are asking, what should workers expect when they're presented with a severance agreement? What protections exist in our legal framework? And how can both sides, employees and employers, navigate this transition more responsibly? To help us unpack all of this, we're joined by Ian Lim, partner at TSMP Law Corporation and head of TSMP's employment and labor team. Ian, good morning. Thanks so much for joining us.
Good morning, Audrey. Thanks for having me.
Great to have you. A pretty serious topic we're talking about today. So let's start with the basics here, Ian. What happens when retrenchment happens here in Singapore? What does a typical severance agreement usually cover here?
Well, look, there's the termination notice, which will cover things like your last day, notice pay, leave encashment, things like that, garden leave or not. Then there's the severance agreement or separation agreement, which will have things like what extra is the employer giving you, like retrenchment benefit or ex gratia, and then in return, what do they want from you? Typically things like a release and discharge, don't sue them. Non-disparagement, don't disparage them, and those tend to be the key details.
Okay, but it does vary from company to company, is that correct?
It does vary from company to company. The payment varies from company to company. What they require or don't require of you also varies, as we've seen in the Agoda case.
Yeah, okay, so let's hone in on the Agoda case, which reportedly warned affected staff against reporting to government agencies. Why did these terms trigger such strong reactions from unions and the Ministry of Manpower? What boundaries did that situation put to the test?
So it's a relatively fine line perhaps, but it's also a red line at the same time. I mentioned just now that employers can require release and discharge. They're giving you something extra, so don't sue them, right? But what's really unusual in this case that we haven't seen before, at least I haven't seen before, is barring the employees from going to the authorities at all, from even trying, from going to any of the authorities. MOM, Ministry of Manpower, TAFAP, Tripartite Alliance for Fair Employment Practices, TADM, Tripartite Alliance for Dispute Management, a lot of long acronyms. The tribunals. You can't bar someone from going to these places. It's statutorily protected.
Okay, so that is unenforceable under Singapore law then?
It's unenforceable. So then the question arises, was the employer trying to, trick is a strong word, but, make the employees think that they could not go to these places when actually they could.
Yeah.
And that was what drew the strong reaction, that they can't go to the authorities when actually you can't stop them from going to the authorities.
Okay, so let's dig deeper into these kind of agreements. What other kinds of clauses in severance agreements might be seen as overreaching or unenforceable in Singapore law?
Well, perhaps imposing some kind of 5-year non-compete or things like that, right? So not everything that goes into a contract just because it's there is necessarily enforceable.
Yeah.
Singapore has freedom of contract, but within boundaries. We also have this thing called public policy, which will make certain clauses unenforceable, such as in this case. You can't stop someone from going to the MOM.
Yeah, so if an employee feels pressured into signing something, what real options do they have? Are there legal or institutional options available to them?
Well, they can always ask for more time. I would say a decent employer will give the employees a couple of days at least to think about the agreement rather than trying to make them sign on the spot. Of course, it's in the employer's interest to make them sign on the spot, but the decent thing to do would be to let people feel comfortable with what they're signing. They're already being let go, right? And the employees can always go to the tribunals anyway. They can always go to the authorities anyway.
Yeah, so for someone who's just been laid off, what are the very first steps they should take before signing anything?
Well, they should read carefully what they're signing, and consult a lawyer if they're able to. If they are unionized, they can go to the union. NTUC provides great resources for such workers. And to be honest, there's a lot of information available online, even if they don't go to a lawyer.
Okay. So there are different types of workers as well. Not all of us are in the same boat. Are there differences in rights or protections between let's say, contract staff and full-time employees? How should each group think about their position if retrenchment does happen?
Well, they need to understand what's in the employment contract as well, right? If you're a contract staff and you have 1 month to go on your fixed-term contract, then I guess it's not that big a deal. It's a bigger deal when you are someone who's essentially a permanent employee. You know, your job has no end date. But typically these days, we tend to find employers being quite responsible and giving retrenchment benefit anyway, which is usually pegged to the number of years of service.
Okay.
So a long-time employee gets a larger payment.
Okay. Do we have like a better idea of what that is? Maybe 1 month's pay for every year served?
Yes, under the retrenchment advisory, the tripartite advisory, the range is 2 weeks to a month per year of service. And then where you land in that range depends on the company's financial position and also the industry norms.
Okay, so it really does depend from company to company. So retrenchment benefits aren't statutory here in Singapore. Do you think the current framework is sufficient, or should there be a stronger legislation for this?
I actually think the current framework works quite well. And we've seen quite a big shift, to be honest. I've been doing employment law for a long time. And in the years before COVID, you almost never saw local companies pay retrenchment benefit. You would see the multinationals do it, and the local companies, a lot of them wouldn't. Then during COVID, of course, sadly, there were a lot of retrenchments and a lot of attention was drawn to this area. And now, to be honest, most responsible employers would do so unless those who are in serious financial trouble pulling out of Singapore, things like that. So the current framework works pretty well, I would say. And you have the authorities coming down hard, on companies that don't pay it. In fact, Agoda did pay retrenchment benefit. It's just that they had that clause, that bars you from going to the authorities, which drew a lot of flack, as we all know.
Yeah. So on the other side of this coin, what are the arguments for keeping retrenchment benefits pretty flexible rather than making them a legal entitlement?
Well, you always have to allow the company to provide and offer what suits it, right? There are other benefits that you could offer to the employee also, like waiving some of the restrictive covenants. I talked about non-competes just now. You could waive that, or the non-solicitation, non-poaching. You're letting the person go already. Then where you land in the range also depends on the company also. I mean, if they're retrenching people, they're probably not in a fantastic financial position, so you also have to allow the companies some latitude. It's not all about the employees, it's about both the employer as well.
What is the reasonable amount of time when it comes to non-competes?
Well, that's a whole other conversation. Yeah, I think you typically see the market landing between 6 months to a year, which is why, I gave a high watermark of 5 years. That for sure is not going to be enforceable.
Got it. Okay. So from the employer's perspective, what does it mean to handle layoffs responsibly? Not just ticking the legal boxes, but in terms of, fairness, transparency, protecting morale.
Yeah, I think it's really important for the company to explain properly and sensitively to the employees why this is happening, rather than just laying it on them like a thunderbolt and saying, clear out your desk. Now, this morning is your last in the company. Here's your box, put your potted plant and everything, and goodbye. Have a good life. People appreciate transparency. People appreciate, that companies have reasons for doing what they do. What they don't appreciate is having it sprung on them, with no notice and no compassion.
So finally, if you had to leave workers with one key piece of advice for the day they might face a layoff, what would that piece of advice be?
Well, read carefully what you're being asked to sign. Talk to a lawyer, if you can consult one. Talk to your friend who might be a lawyer, or just look up resources online. Go to the authorities. There's a lot, to be honest, in this information age, there's a lot of avenues out there that you can pursue and seek information from.
So going to the authorities is never an issue, even if it's in the clause?
Yeah, you can't stop someone from going to the tribunals or TADM, the Tripartite Alliance for Dispute Management. You may have signed something, and of course what the company has paid you is always going to be relevant, but you can always go there. Okay,
well, retrenchment will always be difficult, but if handled responsibly, it can be a process that balances both compassion and fairness. Big thanks to Ian Lim, partner at TSMP Law Corporation and head of TSMP's employment and labor team, for joining us today. Thank you so much for your insights.
Thanks very much, Audrey.
Thank you. You're listening to Money FM 89.3.
To listen to more great interviews, download our podcasts at audio.sg or download the audio app. That's AWEDIO, audio at the App Store and Google Play.